Just a few more minutes, folks. Just 3 or 4 more minutes, and we'll get started. So just FYI.
Yeah, it is. I think it is now. My name's Carolyn Fagenbush. I'm co-chair of the council. As you know, once Jason submitted his resignation, Andrea and Jordan got together and submitted a plan to the personnel team and to the council. We met jointly. That was back on June 3rd. June 10th or so, I talked to you to give you an idea of the plan, and we hadn't had an opportunity to meet with Andrea and Jordan themselves because baby and maternity leave, Jordan being at youth camp and at CBF. So we have that opportunity today, and we'll also do it again on Zoom on Wednesday. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Where's Rick? For Rick Forrest for prayer, and then David Eisenmenger will be helping with fielding the questions. He'll be our moderator. So thank you again for being here.
Will you pray with me, please? We gather today, O God, with much on our minds, many concerns that vie for our attention. Help us to focus our hearts and minds on this place and this time as we contemplate the future of this congregation. Grant us ears to hear clearly that which is being presented. Grant us eyes to see the possibilities that lie ahead. Grant us hearts open to each other and to you. The future can be scary. The future can be exhilarating. Help us to know that we do not enter the future alone. Seeing then the task before us, bind our hearts and hands as one. May our labor be in union, our resolve and thine be one. With one spirit let us labor toward the bright horizon far. In the midst of tempest peril, be thy cross our guiding star. This is our prayer this day, in your holy name and through your holy grace and love. Amen.
Everyone. Wait for my mic to kick in here. All right, we'll try again. Good afternoon. We're coming across. Fantastic, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be together for this conversation right now with both of these folks and our full congregation that is here. Our full Crescent Hill family, both here and online. So as we begin, a brief piece that I'd like to share with you from Parker Palmer. This is a piece that Alice Adams shared with me that is a typical beginning for women's gatherings that are part of our church. And so as worship has set the tone for today, and Rick's prayer has set the tone for today, let me begin to kind of settle us into the occasion of why we're here. This is from Parker Palmer's Circle of Trust, Touchstones. Speak your truth in ways that respect other people's truths. Our views of reality may differ, but speaking one's truth in a circle of trust does not mean interpreting, correcting, or debating what others say. Speak from your center to the center of the circle, using I statements, trusting people to do their own sifting and winnowing. No fixing, saving, advising, or correcting each other. This is one of the hardest guidelines for those of us who like to help. But it's vital to welcoming the soul, to make space for the inner teacher. So with that, I invite you into our discussion today. If I may, let me describe a couple of logistics, and then we can get underway. First, as Carolyn has outlined, our purpose today is to listen to the proposal that Andrea and Jordan have, and in addition to that, offer our responses to the proposal itself in terms of questions or encouragements. As Carolyn commented, today is not a business meeting, so there won't be a vote today, but we're here to listen and to respond. So, in terms of logistics, Andrea will speak first, and then Jordan afterward, and then we'll turn to your questions or remarks afterward. All right? In terms of other logistics, we'll have a couple of folks available on the sides who have microphones. Today, since we're live streaming, we ask that all your questions do go through the mic so that all who are watching can hear. If you would prefer to have your question written and read from here, we have cards that we'll be distributing. You can write your question on that card and then either hold it up and a microphone person will collect it, or pass it to the aisle and that person can hold them up. So we'll take a minute and distribute a couple of cards. Because we're live streaming, we'll also be taking some comments from the folks who may be watching online, and so we'll intersperse comments from the congregation with written comments that come either from online or from the cards here. We'll try to move around the room and keep the questions going. So with that, let me hand it over to Andrea.
First, I want to say hello. Some of you I have not seen in the last 3 months. Many of you I have, because I have been in and out quite a bit more than I anticipated during this maternity leave. I will officially be back from maternity leave this coming week, so it's like your sneak peek. We're back, we're alive. We're also moving in 10 days, so prayers are appreciated. First, I'm going to say that I've gotten a lot of questions like, were you surprised when Jason told you of his next plans? Yes and no. I'm not surprised that he was found for this job. I was not surprised that this job intrigued him and that this was a good opportunity for him and his family. I was a little surprised of the timing, maybe even a little bit irritated, to be honest. He called me, I don't remember when it was, it's all a blur. And I honestly told him, of course, you can't not take this opportunity. It sounds like it's perfect for you. It sounds like it's doable for your family, although it will take adjustments, and we will be fine. And he was like, oh, good. Yeah, you'll be fine. It's fine. I can do this. So I'm just going to start there. We will be fine however this plays out. I just wanted to give a brief history of how Crescent Hill came to the co-pastor model. For those of you who were not here in 2011 and 2012, which is when we transitioned from your more traditional style of a senior pastor and staffing to a co-pastorship. When I first came to Crescent Hill back in August of 2008, Greg Pope was our senior pastor, Bill Johnson was the associate pastor, Jason Crosby was here part-time as a youth minister, and I was brought in to be part-time children's minister, part-time after-school daycare director. It was an interesting job that changed greatly over the years. So in 2011, Greg Pope announced his resignation, which was a very quick turnaround. I was told on a Tuesday, he told the church on Sunday, and 2 weeks later he was gone. So that was a bit of a surprise to me. Other folks I have now heard through the years that they knew it was coming long before I did, but that's just how some things work. So Jason, myself, and Bill Johnson sat down the day after Greg had told us he was resigning, and we said, how do we get through this next period? Bill Johnson, if you remember, a couple weeks before Greg announced his resignation, Bill said he was going to be retiring in a year. So we knew we had that transition coming up as well. Also, I was not here before Greg when we had an interim pastor, but I've heard some stories that that was not the best time in our church's life. You can ask folks who were here if you want more information. Since I wasn't here, I can't really speak to that. And so we had the sense that we did not want to go that traditional route of hiring an interim, buying us some time, doing a traditional search, interviewing, and then bringing in someone new. And so the three of us sat down and said, what if the three of us take over the responsibilities of what Greg was then doing, and we just kind of redistribute some responsibilities. At that time, the daycare had closed, and so I had a little bit more time. Jason went from part-time to full-time, so he had some more time to do responsibilities. And we floated the idea that we would do this three-way co-pastor for 1 year, getting us to Bill Johnson's retirement from the ministry. That got us a year down the road. We had lots of congregational conversations and question and answer sessions during that year. And through that process, it was decided that Jason and I would stay as co-pastors, sharing those pastoral responsibilities as well as some other responsibilities that would typically be an associate ministers or something like that. And that has got us from 2012 to now. So it seems to have worked pretty well, at least from my vantage points. When Jason called me, I said, well, that's fine. Jordan's around. We can keep doing this, right? It made perfect sense to me. I didn't really think too much about it. But then I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm not the only one at the church, so we probably should talk about it and see where we're going. And at my timeline, these last 3 months are a little bit, I don't know exactly when, what happened, but shortly after, Jordan and I sat down and said, let's just brainstorm. What would this look like? If we were to continue this co-pastor model, how can we fill in the gaps, make sure things are covered, and move forward with as little interruption to our activities and ministries as possible? So we came up with the proposal, and I'll briefly outline it. My job would change. Currently, my job is children, adult spiritual formation, digital stuff, the computer networking in the office, like the hardware and the plug-in stuff, and then just kind of whatever else is around that needs to get done, which can be a lot. Details, right? Jason's job description is administration and preaching and pastoral care. And even before Jason's announced his resignation, we had already been talking about shifting some of those responsibilities that would meet our strengths a little bit better. And we had already been in conversation with the personnel team about possibly moving some of the administration load to mine and redistributing some. So it seemed natural to continue on that path. So the proposal is that I would stay on as co-pastor. I would take on the brunt of the administration. So that means overseeing the finance team and the finance secretary, overseeing church council meetings, any team meetings that are happening, making sure we keep up with minutes and policies and procedures. Anytime we need to update policies and procedures, those would run through kind of under my umbrella to make sure we're following all of our bylaws and manuals. I would take on the kind of overseeing the office stuff. So the supervision of the staff would come under my umbrella now as well. And then as we grow our digital platforms, that would come under my umbrella too. What most people have asked is, what about the children? What about the youth? If you guys are taking on these extra responsibilities, what happens to those ministries? My proposal would be that we start a heftier internship program. We partner with some of our seminaries that are local, or even reach out to some of the education schools who want some hands-on experience, and that, you know, down the road, hopefully not too far down the road, we would be able to bring in a children's intern and a youth intern. And I would supervise those interns so that we can continue the ministry to our children and youth as we have been. And that would still follow under my umbrella, although these interns, you would see their face with the volunteers more, and you'd see their face jumping in to sub for Sunday school when somebody last minute gets sick or something along those lines. In the meantime, that means that if this proposal goes forward, we would need some different volunteers in place. Currently, we still haven't been able to open the 9:30 Sunday school hour for our children in preschool. We have to get that open. There's parents who want to come to their Sunday school class and aren't gonna come if there's nothing for their kids. They're not gonna, I have 2 little kids. I'm not bringing them to a Sunday school class to try to get anything meaningful out of it. I get it. The parents are all laughing, like, yeah. So we have to get that started back up. We gotta have the 9:30 hour. We've gotta have worship care for our younger ones. So that's one of my first priorities to get into place after this maternity leave ends, is to get that going again. I will also be hopefully looking for some interns, as long as that is also approved in this process, because we can't do it all. If we're gonna be in this service, we can't be in worship care. If we're gonna be in Wednesday night in person, we can't be doing the children and youth. Like, we physically just can't do it. So the interns and volunteers we're gonna have to really rely on to make this proposal work. I'm just glancing at my notes. I was asked in one of the meetings, or phone calls or texts, I'm not even sure when, like, well, would you just wanna be the senior pastor? And I said, no, no. That is not my personality. Preaching is not my forte. I can do it. I've gotten a lot better in these last 15 years. Practice does help, but that's still not where my joy and my light come from. It's still a challenge for me, so I would not want to do that 52 weeks of the year. Like, that just gives me anxiety saying it. Like, no. As a parent with 2 young kids, having a co-pastorate is crucial. Like, there are times that I cannot be at every church function, but a co-pastor can step in. There are times that Jordan is gonna be off with doing stuff with his family that he's not gonna be able to be here. So having that co-pastor model allows us to be here and present most of the time, but also knowing that our other person can also be here to cover whatever we can't. We talked about, and Jordan's gonna go into this a little more, his responsibilities would be preaching. I will say that in this discussion, I somehow agreed to actually preaching more than I currently am, and will be preaching about once a month instead of like 8 or 9 times a year that I have been. I don't know how that happened, but I said yes, so there we have it. So with that, Jordan would be preaching about 3 times a month. Yes, we know some months have 5 weeks, and like I said, it's an ebb and flow. We will figure those out. We've also talked about bringing in other voices, because, you know, I get tired of hearing the same voice. You guys have to get tired of hearing the same voice too. So new voices from the pulpit, I think, is important to both of us. Trying to read my notes, like, don't want to forget anything. But as far as the proposal, I think a co-pastorship works for a church our size. We don't have the membership and the finances to hire a senior pastor, an associate pastor, a youth minister, a children's minister, a full-time that full hefty staff that some of us were used to back in the past. But having the co-pastor model means that there's at least one of us always on call and always available to step in, knowing what is happening in all aspects of the church life so that we can jump in and do those things. So I'm going to let Jordan tell you about what his responsibilities would be if this co-pastor model proposal will go through. Over to you, Jordan.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us for church overtime today. I heard some of y'all laughing when Jason talked about his grandma excited to go to church for about the second or third time in one day, and I thought, they don't know they're going to have to stick around for more after the service today. No, thanks to all of you for being here for this time of conversation. I am so encouraged to be at Crescent Hill Baptist Church for such a time as this. And what I'd like to do during my time is share with you not only what I envision my future role at Crescent Hill to be upon the call of this church, but I would like to also articulate some of what my calling has been and some of my experience up to this point in my ministry. You all know Andrea. She's been here. She's been called by this congregation. And what I've realized in the past few weeks as we've been having these conversations is that some of y'all know me so well that you might be able to get into your vehicle and drive down to Knott County, where I'm from, right? But some of you don't know me as well. And so I really am looking forward to our time together today and in the coming days to be able to share some of my story with you. My role, if this were to pass the call of this church, would be pastor of preaching, pastoral care, and imaginative witness. My pap would call that last one a $2 word, but I plan to further outline each of those to you. Preaching, pastoral care, and imaginative witness. Let me speak a little bit about my calling before I speak about those roles. I was 8 years old the first time that I went to my pastor, Brother Danny, pastor of the little Free Will Baptist church back home that I grew up in, and I told him after church that I needed to have a serious conversation with him. And so there was a long pew that sat behind the pulpit, and we sit down on the pew, and Brother Danny put his hand on my knee, and he said, "Well, Jordan, what do you want to talk about?" And I said, "Brother Danny, I'm called to preach the gospel." And he looked at me and in a kind and loving but serious way said, "I'm glad to hear that." And rather than joking me off or telling me to go and, come back when I was 18 and we'll talk about it later, he took me very, very seriously from that very first conversation. And I have often wondered if our children can teach us so much about God. This was underscored to me when we went to Passport Camp just a couple weeks ago. Children do not care about your socioeconomic status. Children do not care about skin color. Children do not care about all the ways that we make up for ourselves to divide ourselves in this world. Children do not see that. And he took me so seriously, and I've often wondered if he had not, would I be here today? Would I have continued to pursue a call to ministry? Nonetheless, he took me seriously. And about a month later, on a Wednesday night, I preached at our little church. They had to bring out a small little pulpit, a fake pulpit, as I called it. I did not like that I had to stand at the small pulpit, and it was down a step or two on the altar, and I stood behind it to preach. I thought my first sermon behind what I called the big pulpit, I was doing big stuff when I preached that first sermon a few years later. So I grew up preaching. That was the environment I grew up in. In our church and other Baptist churches around our region, Pentecostal churches, Methodist churches, that was who I was. And about the time that I got to thinking about college, there was a youth pastor at a local church who had graduated from Boyce College. And he said, if you're going to be serious about pursuing ministry vocationally, you ought to think about going to Bible college. And I thought, well, that makes perfect sense. I'll go to a place where the Bible's not just a sideline kind of deal, but they have given themselves over to theology and to the scriptures and to church history, and this sounds like a wonderful place. So I came up here to a couple visits, and I thought, yeah, this is the place for me, and so I enrolled as a student at Boyce College. Well, the very first weekend I was at Boyce College is the first time that I ever remember hearing the words Crescent Hill Baptist Church. Because in orientation, we were told that just because a church said Baptist on the door did not make it, and I'm quoting now, a Bible-believing Baptist church. And that there are some churches, like Crescent Hill Baptist Church a block away, where if we go to visit and the seminary parking sticker is found in the parking lot of Crescent Hill on our vehicles, we will be asked to leave by the members. True story. I told Jason that when we first met, and I thought his jaw was going to knock the bottom out of the floor. They do these crazy kind of things. They said, like, have women as preachers and have gay folks as members of their church. And so I just took that little nugget of knowledge and put it away and thought, okay, that's what that place is. And as my time continued at Boyce College, I realized that Boyce College was not what I intended to sign up for. In an Old Testament class, our professor distributed an article written by Roy Honeycutt. Now, I didn't know much about Roy Honeycutt then, other than we had a bunch of buildings on campus named after him. And we were to read the article. It was on Exodus. And the assignment was to critique, not in a scholarly way, but in a critical, in an intentionally negative way, what Dr. Honeycutt had written in that article. I can't recall that article exactly, but I can tell you that whatever was in it was not at all controversial to me. And it was that day that I said, this is not what I signed up for. I did not sign up to read the scriptures in order to take the scriptures and attack other people and their livelihoods with it. That is not what church is about. That is not what Christianity is about. That is not the gospel that God has called me to preach. So that's the last class I ever went to. And from that moment on, I decided that I had to leave Boyce College, and that if I was going to live into who God really created me to be, then I had to come out as a gay man. I never envisioned doing either of those things in my entire life, by the way. So I thought, how in the world do I do this? I've got a whole county supporting me who will be very disappointed when I don't go back home and become the pastor of a Southern Baptist church there. How do I break the hearts of 16,000 people back home who love me? How do I break the hearts of my parents and grandparents who surely would be disappointed when they learned what I had to say? I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew I'd need help. So I decided to pick up the phone and call that place that I would have never known about were it not for Boyce College. And from the time that I stepped into Jason's office down the hallway until today, my life has drastically changed for the better. I told the church council and personnel team when we met with them, I was hurting so bad that day that I wasn't sure if I was still hanging on a cross or if I had already been placed in a tomb. But I was wounded. I had the scars to show it. And the life that I'm able to live is a resurrected life. And it's a life that has been resurrected by the people of this place. Time and time and time again. When Patrick and I were married in this sanctuary in 2016, and we invited all of you thinking, maybe about a quarter of them will show up. And then you all came. And we said, my goodness, where are we going to sit these people at the reception? We don't have room. There's an outpouring of your love. As I transferred to Campbellsville University, Chris Conver was instrumental in making sure I got the credits I could from Boyce, having them transferred to Campbellsville. I needed a place to work, had experience in the funeral business. Greg Robertson and Brian Williams held my hand, helped me move stuff out of my dorm room at Boyce, move it into their basement because I didn't have anywhere else to put it or anywhere else to go. Didn't know anybody in Louisville. I was employed by Archel Hetty Funeral Home thanks to Greg's endorsement. Worked there, making funeral arrangements, meeting with families, continuing to minister. And during all of that time, I had in the back of my head this notion of, I'm still called to preach. I'm still called to the ministry. I'm as called now as I ever was. So I finished up at Campbellsville, went to Baptist Seminary of Kentucky, a place where I learned much from wonderful people of God. And wouldn't you know it, where was the graduation when I walked across the stage? I walked across this stage. The same place where I was married, the same place where I was ordained, the same place where I came to when I was, as Rachel Held Evans would say, a refugee of the church's own making. And so I come before you today as one who is called to the ministry and uniquely called and positioned to this place because Crescent Hill's story is my story, and my story is Crescent Hill's story. And I know how significant this place behind me is to so many of you and has been in the history of this place. I'm a student of the history of this place. And when Patrick and I were in Dallas just last week, and you walk around with a name tag at CBF General Assembly that says Crescent Hill Baptist Church on it, everyone wants to say, oh, I know Crescent Hill. I know what y'all stand for. Keep up the good work. We were seated at a luncheon on Friday morning with a young woman who was from Kenya. She saw our name tags. We introduced herself. She's a seminary student down at McAfee. She said, oh, Louisville. I used to live in Louisville. We said, oh, really? Come to find out, her partner was seated next to her at our lunch. She was a lesbian who was once a student at Southern Seminary. She was kicked out of Southern Seminary for being who she was. I explained to her that I was kicked out of Boyce College. Not really, but I kicked Boyce College out, rather. It was the other way around. And we shared that connection, and we started talking about Crescent Hill, and she said, oh, I know Crescent Hill. I know that place. And later, as we were talking, I discovered that she was a recipient of a scholarship. I was on the committee to give the scholarship to her. We gave it to her and another student, a scholarship of the Affirming Network of the CBF, our first ever scholarship. She was the recipient. And we had met in person at General Assembly around that lunch table. So what I bring before you is a long history of preaching. When I met Patrick, there was a Southern Baptist church back home who was fixing, as we'd say back home, who was fixing to call me as their senior pastor. Church averages about 150 or so on Sunday morning. And I was their guy. I had been through the interview process. They had heard me preach at 2 different churches. And I had to tell them, as bad as it hurt, that I was not their guy. And that they needed to continue to search in their process. That was way back in 2014. I bring that preaching experience, but also pastoral care experience to this position. Many of you know that I was employed, as I said earlier, at the funeral home, and I saw folks in all kinds of different positions across the table from me. And when I walked into a room with a family to make arrangements, I always envisioned myself as a funeral director, but more than that, as a minister of the gospel. And I didn't have to preach a sermon to those folks, and I didn't have to pack my Bible in there, and I didn't have to do all those things in order to minister and care for them while they were under my care at the funeral home. And the very last part of my role, and I'm closing, that's my first time I'm saying that. The very last part of my role that I want to talk about is what I've called imaginative witness. And I'm not just trying to be cute by saying that word, but this church has a unique history of prophetic witness in our community and in our larger Baptist family. That's a history that's widely known, and it's a history that continues on to this day. I think that what happens in worship, what happens at 10:45 on Sunday morning, in many ways is still the heartbeat of our church. It's when we come together to lament together, to gather at the table together, to hear the preached word together. What happens during that time should be intentionally crafted. And it should be crafted with the liturgical calendar in mind, with what's going on in our world in mind, with the gifts of our own congregation in mind, and with the realization that we have a platform at this church. God has gifted us with a prophetic platform, and it is incumbent upon us to use that gift wisely. And I think that what should happen at 10:45 on Sunday morning should propel us, that when we leave out those doors, we are propelled out by the power of God's Spirit to go to work in our world, to join the Spirit of God wherever the Spirit is blowing, and to make the kingdom of God come to be in the world that God has blessed us to live in. That's some of the vision that I have for this place. And I can tell by Patrick's facial expression that I need to close for real at this point.
Andrea, Jordan, thank you both for sharing your vision and your sense of call. We'll pause for just a second and let people kind of collect. And if there are questions, please hold up a hand. We have 2 folks with microphones. They'll bring the microphone to you and give you an opportunity to ask your question. When you take your mic, do a better job than me at projecting your voice into it.
I was going to write it down, but I'll just ask you. What is great, I have to say. One of the things that we've wondered about, though, is, and I'm looking around at the congregation that's gathered here, and I noticed a lot of gray hair, mine included. And if the church is going to have a future doing what you are proposing, there's going to have to be outreach to young adults and young married couples with kids, because, you know, kids are sort of the lifeblood of a congregation, the future of a congregation. So talk to us a little bit about how your vision will also reach out to young adults and young couples.
I'll start. So first I will say we have more young families than we realize. We don't always see them. And the reason we don't see them, one, some of our children are just now eligible for the COVID vaccine. So for the last 2 years, I know of 3 or 4 families who would not bring their children because they could not be vaccinated. We also don't always see them because right now, we don't have a Sunday school for them. We don't have a Sunday school. Their parents aren't going to come haul them for 1 hour and haul them back. It's a lot of work. I've done it. The more kids you have, the more work it is. We have to have stuff for the children and for the youth before we have the masses of children we all want to see. The only way I can get some of our young families back is to tell them there will be a place for your kids at 9:30 so you can go to your Sunday school class. Until I can get that back, they're not going to come. That's just the sad reality of it. We also have to realize that they are going to interact with our church much differently. I've spoken at least this week to at least 3 or 4 of our young families, mostly because it has been personal need. I've needed some play dates for my children so I could pack, but in that I've been able to contact them and talk to them. They know what's going on. They know that we had this question and answer. Some of them are out of town, so they're not going to be here this week. Some of them are like, well, if you say it's good, I'm good with you, and I don't need to come to a question and answer. Okay, fine. If you trust us that much, I'm glad. And they are connecting with us digitally when they can't be here in person. Now, I'm not saying we don't want more young families. We definitely do. But we have to start with what we have and offer them ministries where we are right now with who we have before we can even start bringing in new families. If a new family comes and I don't have a Sunday school class to send them to, their children to, they're not going to come back. If they come on a Wednesday night to prayer meeting and I don't have volunteers in place to take their kids that moment, they're not going to come back. If we don't meet them where they are, no matter how much outreach and how many new families we can bring in this door, they're not going to stay. So the first thing we have to do is get our Sunday school at 9:30 back and fully staffed every single week. The second thing we need to do is contact the families that we do have, now that it is a little safer for them to bring their children in, and start explaining what we have put in place and that there will be volunteers every single week for your kids to be with. We get those things in place, and then our outreach will work because there's somewhere for them. That's my first priority. We have to have, And I know it's incredibly frustrating because I've done it, planned, and had an open classroom and no kids show up that week. It is frustrating. But if we can get past that frustration and look at the longer view, that we need to have that classroom open regardless if there is a child that uses it that Sunday or not, so that when that child does show up, they are cared for. And I'm saying some of this somewhat selfishly because I am back next Sunday and I can't bring my 2 girls. So until we get that Sunday school in place, it's hard to bring in other folks. Do you want to jump on that?
Well, I think Andrea spoke a little bit about the infrastructure that it's important to have in place for young families. I want to say also that first impressions are very important to folks who are looking to a new community of faith. And I'm actually not talking about when they come through those doors on Sunday morning, because for people that are around my age, that is not their first impression. They have not just driven by and seen the church and said, oh, well, let's go try that church. No, they have looked you up on social media. They have probably looked at your website, but more than that, they've certainly looked at your Facebook page. If you have live stream services, they have perused those live stream services. If you have videos on there, they have watched them. If you have pictures placed on there, they have gone through them. So, communications and digital outreach are an essential part.
Stop you right there. I do have an announcement. So one of the other many things I've done on my maternity leave, other than just being a mom, is interview folks for a communication specialist position. It's a part-time position that will be some way, yes, our friends up in the sound booth are excited too. We'll be taking over administration assistant duties as well as helping us with our social media platforms. Rhonda and I did a few Zoom interviews. Jordan and I did an in-person interview last week. Like I said, my timelines are all a mess right now. And we have extended an offer to a young lady named Lillian Gordon. It should be easy enough for me to remember Lillian, let's hope. And she will start July 18th. She is a recent graduate from Bellarmine University. She has a lot of fun energy. She knows the social media platforms. She knows computers. She can do Word documents. She can do Excel. She can do all of that stuff we need. What she doesn't know, I can teach her. We can get that ball rolling. So I am excited that she will be starting very soon. And I hope that as you guys get to meet her, you will enjoy her presence as much as I have in meeting her over the last couple weeks. And that will help us with the digital communication and having that first impression. We do, we've been through this. We have a Facebook site that we have some stuff on and we're getting better, but we need that consistency. We need to get our Instagram account going. Like, we have an account, but there's nothing there. We need to have somebody dedicated besides just me to make sure that our website stays updated. And like I said, as this proposal goes, she will fall under my supervision, and so we will be working closely to make sure that all of our communications, from our printed stuff to our email stuff to our social media platforms to even the wordings that we use, are consistent, are in the same voice, and are on an ongoing, intentional basis. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to put that out there.
You interrupted with where I was going. So no, that's good. And I will say, in 1956, when Dr. Burhans led the church to build the 56, the Burhans building, Bill Johnson, so if the facts are wrong, you can go down and knock on Bill's door, because this came from him. Bill Johnson said, that was really an ambitious, first of its kind of project, that a church would go as far as to build a large gym, that the church would go as far as to build a fellowship hall and attach it to their building and saying, we're making this commitment to church, not just being a place in the sanctuary, but a place where folks come to do all kinds of different activities. As revolutionary and as important as that brick and mortar investment was in 1956 to meet the needs of the church today, this investment that we are making in the online infrastructure of the ministry of this place is absolutely critical. And it will go, we need to, I think, increasingly think of this as important as our brick and mortar structures. As I was talking to ministers at General Assembly this week, we aren't the only church trying to do this right now. Everyone, and COVID escalated this, everyone is trying to figure out, okay, how do we have a consistent, a clean, and attractive online presence, because we know folks are visiting us there before they ever come here. So this will be a boon to the ministry of our church, and it will help all of our volunteers who are so faithful about doing behind-the-scenes work to make conversations like this happen. We're live streaming right now, and so it's a crucial piece of that puzzle.
Next question's in the back.
Mine is not a question, but I just want to say that I am so heartened by the excitement, by the sense of getting us out of the doldrums that we've been in, certainly the last 2.5 years. I thought I knew you guys, but I've learned so much already today, and I just look forward to working with you to make those dreams come true.
Oh, and Janet, we might need you to help with Lillian a little bit. I don't know logos at all, so we'll probably be calling you. Just FYI.
Next question's here. Not yet.
You're good.
Talking. Okay, I got it. I just wanted to say I appreciate y'all, your position on the co-pastor. I think that's a wonderful model, and I'd like to continue that. Also, you can see my hair is gray, and a lot of us in here have gray hair too. And your explanation of the outreach now with the internet and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, that's where the young generation is. I mean, I know that. I'm not familiar with it as much, but I know that's how. But my question I want to ask you about is, what time frame do you have in terms of, if you accept the job, do you have a time frame in terms of a commitment for a period of time? That's basically the question I have.
Just to clarify, do you mean for when this proposal would go into place?
Say that again?
For when we would start this proposal, like?
I guess what I mean is, if you're hired, if we decide to hire you, then what kind of commitment or what kind of feeling do you have in terms of a time frame that you'll continue on in that job?
Well, I've been here for 15 years, so I don't have any, like, I'm not going anywhere for a while, as long as y'all don't kick me out. So there's that. I'll let you say what you say.
Sure. So I would just say that Patrick's family lives about 10 minutes from here in the Highlands, in the house that his grandpa grew up in a house that's 3 doors down from Jason Crosby. My ancestors have lived in Kentucky since the Revolutionary War. So I'm about as close to anywhere else as I want to be at the moment. So I believe in this place, and I believe in the ministry of this place, and it's bigger than me, it's bigger than Andrea, it's bigger than one individual. It takes all of us. But I am looking forward to many years of ministry at Crescent Hill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Andrea reminded me, I have said thus far that I am committing myself to y'all, and I invite y'all to commit yourselves to me. That is how I've felt about this process. Yeah.
From a logistical standpoint, we have this Q&A today. We have another one on Wednesday during the prayer meeting for anyone who wants to join us for another question and answer, anybody who couldn't join us today. Once that is done, then help me out, Ron. It goes back to personnel and church council. They will give the recommendation, and then it will come to the church for a vote. We want that process to move as quickly as we can. Personnel has extended to, what's the word I'm looking for? Continue the interim that Jordan's been working at least through the end of July to give us time to work, end of August, at least through then. If we vote and the proposal goes through before then that will be the news. So we want this process to go as quickly, but we also aren't trying to rush it or push it through before everyone's ready to make that decision.
Margaret, you had a question?
My question was just going to be a little bit about the timing of things, because I just overheard somebody say we're going to have a conversation about the interim pastorate, and I'm like, wait a minute, is this interim that we're talking about, or is this permanent? And so I appreciated your clarifying that there's a timeline. We're actually talking about a permanent co-pastorate that y'all are proposing, church, right? Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, Andrea, how many volunteers do you need to have our Sunday morning staffed for children?
Thank you, Betty. That's a very good question. We have a lot of volunteers. I don't want to downplay that at all. We really do have a whole slew of them. But we have a lot of volunteers who will come once a month. And if we're coming once a month, we need that many more volunteers to fill the slots. So what I foresee for the 9:30, should have brought notes, I have stuff written down. But for the 9:30 Sunday school hour, we would have one elementary classroom, so I would need at least 2 teachers each Sunday. If that's the same 2 teachers every Sunday and they can commit to that, that's great. If it's folks that can commit to once a month, then depending on what folks can commit to, I would need to fill in those Sundays. We would have a preschool classroom, which again would need at least 2 teachers each week. And we would need a toddler/infant classroom. Currently, there would be 2 toddlers that are around 18 months that have been born during COVID. And then at the moment, Audrey, but I know there will be some more coming, or at least one more, eventually. So at least 6 teachers for the 9:30 hour each week. If we get our elementary back on Sunday school, we would not still have the children's church during the worship hour. So there would only be 2 classrooms during the worship hour, an infant toddler room and a preschool room. So 4 teachers there each Sunday. So if you do the math, that's 10 volunteers each Sunday, which then starts adding up if you're looking at a monthly rotation or an every week rotation. So it kind of depends on folks and what they're willing to commit to. Somebody floated the idea instead of once a week each, once, what am I trying to say? Weekly each month. have folks volunteer for, say, a 3-month time. That way they're not committing to be out of their Sunday school class for a year, but then during those 3 months, you have the same 10 volunteers. And then the next 3 months, you could have somebody different. I'm willing to work out a schedule however I need to get it covered. Obviously, the more Sundays a person is willing to work in a month, the less volunteers and the less scheduling that is on my end. But I will schedule whoever is willing on whatever day to make it work. But realistically, it's like 10 volunteers a Sunday. Does that kind of help that picture?
Brian and I found our way here in the summer of 1987. We joined the first Sunday of 1988. We spent the next 10 years coming to our pew and worshiping. We were afraid to come to Sunday school because we would be outed, and we didn't know how we would be received. Brian had started an age unit at Linden Lane, and we were invited to the Solidarity Sunday School class to tell about that ministry and how the Solidarity class could reach out to those residents whose families disowned them because they were gay. This church has given us so much hope, support. I have served many of your families in a loss. We know when we have a crisis, we can definitely reach out to this family of faith. I was on the council when Bill and Jason and Andrea came into our council meeting offering to take over after Greg resigned. And with what we've seen over the last years of their support, their ministry to us, and how open they were to everybody. I've known Jordan from almost day one, from meeting him with a coffee time, telling his story as he's told us today. I support this church and this ministry, and I just want to say what it means to us, to Brian and I, for this love, for this fellowship, and for what each of you mean to us. Thank you.
Are there any questions on cards or from online that have not yet been shared? We have one.
There was a question given to me. What are your plans for outreach for members who have not returned to worship? What are your plans for outreach to youth?
So, I think that COVID has affected our world in a way that I don't know that we quite anticipated. And I think we all presumed that when everything opened back up, everybody would just come back to church. Everybody would just come back to, it's not just church, but come back to basketball games, come back to football games. If you look at gatherings in general, we saw it at General Assembly this week, and Pat and Janet were there. They can attest that, there's always a dip when General Assembly's in Dallas, but this was a significant dip this year. Well, folks don't want to get on the airplane and fly, and I'm not dogging on Texas. But there was a significant dip this year. There were folks who are always there, ministers who are always there, that were not there this year for whatever reason. So I think we have to make sure we're taking care of folks. Rather than outreach, I think that is an extension of our pastoral care ministry of this church. But I have learned over my time here that pastoral care at Crescent Hill is something that is bigger than just one person. It's something that's bigger than just two ministers. Excellent and attentive pastoral care takes the commitment of the entire church. Our Sunday school classes that meet and that are active do an excellent job of this, I think, at present. And so we can lean even more, I think, into that ministry to folks who, you know, used to come during COVID, and you kind of wonder in the back of your mind, who is this? You know, why aren't they with us anymore? I think it is important, again, out of just our need to provide pastoral care to folks, to reach out to folks, you know, members and non-members alike, who have found this place to be a spiritual refuge, and say, hey, maybe you're connecting with us online, you know, because that's another thing that we don't really know. You see the views on YouTube, you see the views on Facebook, but it's not like there's a registry where we can go back and count and say, oh, well, so-and-so's never missed a service. It's just they're joining us online now. That's a new reality. But I think that is a challenge that we have before us, and it's a challenge that I think together we can lean into and make sure we're providing good care to folks, even in these kind of odd times.
Are there any additional questions or comments? Going once. Ray, we'll come right back to you.
I was honored to be one of the people that Jason told personally that he was resigning. And I said to him, I said, I knew this day would come one day, but I have one question for you. I said, will things stay the same? Because me and Mark are honored to be part of this congregation. And he said that it would. And I just want all of you to know that we are honored to be a part of you. And you all have been so good to us. We've lost loved ones, and you've been there for us during this time. And Mark and I support anything that y'all would support you 100%.
Copies of Jordan's resume are available if folks would like to review it. I think Ray was making that. He has them now if anybody would like to review one now. Are there any additional questions that folks may have? Going twice? All right, great. Let me hand it back to Carolyn. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. We're also getting some comments online, and I didn't get a chance to do those, so we are getting a membership list together. Somebody said, I think that's stewardship probably. in a comment that says, "I'm so proud of Andrea and Jordan. It seems great to believe in the future at CHBC." So, again, thank you. And thank you all for your questions, concerns. Thank you to Andrea and Jordan, for the people that put this together. As we say, we're going to be, if you think of questions that you haven't asked, they're going to be doing this dog and pony show again on Wednesday. But this is a great opportunity to ask questions and to see who we've got here. And council has not made any decisions. The main thing was to get the proposal and to get them in front of you, and so that you could have an opportunity to ask what you needed to ask. So thank you again. And if I turn it over to Margaret for a closing prayer.
Before
Yes.
you pray, I would like to thank, on Andrea's behalf, my behalf, the church council and personnel team for making this happen today. But also, would you join me in, our tech team devotes so much time to the ministry of this church, and they're working hard to live stream this. Would you join me in thanking them? Thank you all so much.
Thank you for coming today and participating. And I'd like to thank also Alice Adams. She's worked really hard on this particular event, and she and Daryl are out because Daryl has COVID, so they weren't able to be here, but really, really wanted to be here. So thank you to Alice. Let us pray. Dear God, thank you for this time together. We have prayed several times today in words that we could repeat. But thank you for an opportunity to listen, an opportunity to ask questions. Thank you for Andrea and Jordan being willing to be vulnerable and make themselves available for the questions that we have. Be with us as we continue to discern. This church is important to us and to many. We want to be doing your work for your kingdom. In your Son's name, amen.